They told me he was blind, helpless, and in need of a gentle touch. But when I walked into the dark penthouse, the man sitting in the shadows didn't look helpless. He looked like a nightmare waiting to happen. The elevator doors had opened directly into the living space, a sprawling expanse of black marble and floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked the glittering, jagged skyline of Seoul. The air conditioning was set low enough to prickle the skin, giving the room the sterile, preserved feeling of a mausoleum. Or a meat locker. I adjusted the strap of my medical bag, my grip tightening on the leather handle. I wasn't here to be impressed by the wealth. I was here because the agency said the pay was triple the standard rate for private care, and when you have the kind of debt hanging over your head that I did, you don't ask questions. You just show up. "Mr. Kim?" I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the cavernous room, bouncing off the hard surfaces. There was no answer. I took a few steps forward, my rubber-soled nursing shoes squeaking faintly on the polished floor. That was when I saw him. He was seated in a high-backed leather chair facing the window, his silhouette cutting a sharp, massive shape against the city lights. As I moved around the periphery of the furniture to face him, the breath hitched in my throat. The dossier had described Kim Suk-jong as a recluse recovering from a traumatic accident that took his sight. I had pictured a frail invalid, perhaps wasted away from atrophy and depression. The man before me was a mountain. Even sitting down, the width of his shoulders was imposing, straining against the fabric of a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than my entire life's earnings. He wore black sunglasses, opaque and impenetrable, even in the dim light of the apartment. His hands rested on the armrests of the chair, large, veined, and still. Deadly still. "I'm Selima Thompson," I said, keeping my tone clipped and professional. I wasn't here to coddle him. I was here to ensure he didn't die on my watch so I could collect my check. "Your agency sent me over. I need to conduct an initial physical assessment." He didn't move. He didn't even tilt his head. For a second, I wondered if he was catatonic. "Mr. Kim," I stepped closer, entering his personal space. I could smell him now, a scent of expensive sandalwood, cold rain, and something metallic, like copper. "I need your wrist for a pulse check." I set my bag down on a glass side table and reached for his left hand. His skin was surprisingly hot, a stark contrast to the freezing room. As my fingers found his radial artery, I felt the steady, powerful thrum of his heart. It wasn't the racing heart of a nervous invalid. It was the slow, rhythmic beat of a predator at rest. "Strong pulse," I muttered, more to myself than him, pulling my stethoscope from around my neck. "I'm going to check your blood pressure now. I need you to unbutton your jacket." Silence. I sighed, my patience already thinning. "Look, Mr. Kim, I can do this the easy way, or I can treat you like a stubborn toddler. But I have a job to do." I reached out to undo the top button of his suit jacket myself. That was when he moved. It was a blur of motion, too fast for a blind man. Before my fingers could graze the button, his hand shot up and clamped around my waist. The grip was iron hard, pulling me off balance. I gasped, stumbling forward, colliding with his knees. I was suddenly trapped between his spread thighs, his hand burning a brand into my side through my scrubs. I froze, expecting him to push me away, to tell me to back off. Instead, his hand slid upwards. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't a mistake. His thumb dug into the soft flesh of my hip, tracing the curve with a deliberate, possessive slowness that made my skin crawl. He pulled me closer, so close I could feel the heat radiating off his chest, his head tilted up, those black glasses reflecting my own shocked expression. He was testing the weight of me, handling me not like a nurse, but like merchandise he was considering buying. The disrespect hit me harder than the fear. I wasn't a toy. I wasn't one of the girls my ex-boyfriend used to gamble away. I was a professional, and I was done being handled by men who thought they owned the world. Rage flared in my chest, white-hot and instantaneous. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the consequences. I just reacted. I swung my right hand and slapped him across the face with everything I had. "Welcome, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. If you've been riding with me, you know we don't do boy meets girl here. We do predator meets the one woman dangerous enough to save him. We do the kind of chemistry that's mixed with gunpowder and bad decisions. And if you're new, buckle the hell up. because you're about to witness a collision between a nurse with a debt to pay and a mafia lord with everything to hide. This isn't just a romance, it's a war zone. Hit that like button before the first shot is fired. Subscribe because your obsession starts right now, and smash that notification bell. Because in this world, silence gets you killed. Now, let's watch the blind man see everything. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent penthouse. My palm stung, vibrating with the force of the impact. I stumbled back, wrenching myself free from his grip. My chest was heaving, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stared at him, my hand still raised, waiting for the retaliation, waiting for the security guards to burst in, or for him to produce a weapon. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Kim Suk-jong hadn't flinched. His head was turned slightly to the side from the force of the blow. A red mark was already blooming on his high, pale cheekbone, stark against the skin. I braced myself. Run, my instincts screamed. Get to the elevator. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, he lifted his hand. He didn't reach for me. He reached for his own face. His fingertips grazed the spot where I had hit him. He ran his tongue over his teeth, and then, the corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't a scowl of anger. It was a dark, amused smirk that sent a shiver straight down my spine. He turned his head back toward me. The black glasses were aimed directly at my eyes, and for a terrifying second I felt stripped bare, as if the tint on the lenses didn't exist at all. As if he could see the fear, the debt, and the defiance all swirling inside me. Finally, he rumbled, his voice a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Someone who isn't afraid to touch the monster. You're hired. You're hired. Those two words hit me harder than the recoil of my own slap. They hung in the freezing air of the penthouse, perverse and nonsensical. I stared at him, my hand still throbbing, waiting for the punchline. Waiting for the cruelty that always followed when powerful men got bored. But Kim Suk-jong didn't look bored. He looked like a wolf that had just found a rabbit with teeth. You're insane, I whispered. My voice shook, betraying the bravado I'd summoned only seconds ago. I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed my medical bag from the glass side table, my fingers fumbling with the leather strap. Every instinct I had honed over 3 years of dodging debt collectors and abusive ex-boyfriends was screaming at me to run. This wasn't a job. It was a trap. I'm leaving, I announced, turning on my heel. Find another nurse to play your sick games. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't even move from his chair. He just sat there in the shadows, that faint, terrifying smirk still ghosting his lips. As if he knew something I didn't, as if the door I was walking toward wasn't an exit, but just another wall of the cage. I marched across the expanse of the black marble floor, the squeak of my shoes sounding frantic. I hit the call button for the elevator, stabbing it repeatedly. Come on. Come on. The lights above the brushed steel doors didn't light up. The soft hum of the machinery was absent. Open. I hissed, slamming my palm against the metal. Miss Thompson. The voice didn't come from behind me. It came from the shadows of the hallway to my right. I spun around, my back pressing against the useless elevator doors. 2 men stepped into the light. They were built like tanks, dressed in identical black suits that strained against their bulk. They moved with the silent, heavy grace of hired muscle, the kind that broke kneecaps for a living. They weren't hotel security. They were soldiers. The elevator is locked, the taller one said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Unlock it, I demanded, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I'm leaving. You can't keep me here. That's kidnapping. The tall one didn't blink. He just bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that felt mocking given the circumstances. Mr. Kim has not dismissed you. Please return to the lounge. I don't care what, Mr. Kim. Please, he repeated. He took a single step forward. It wasn't aggressive, but the threat was clear. He was a wall. I was a bird. If I tried to push past him, I would break. I looked between them, calculating my odds. 0. I had a roll of gauze and a stethoscope. They had guns. I could see the bulges under their jackets. I let out a sharp, frustrated breath, gripping my bag until my knuckles turned white. Fine. I pushed off the elevator doors and stormed back into the main room. If I couldn't leave, I was going to make Kim Suk-jong regret keeping me. He was no longer in the chair. He was standing by a sleek, backlit bar cart near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to me. The city lights of Seoul spilled over him, outlining a physique that was terrifyingly impressive. Standing up, he was even larger than I had realized. He had to be over 6'3", his broad shoulders stretching the fabric of his white dress shirt to its limit. He was pouring a drink. Amber liquid splashed into a crystal glass. He didn't fumble. He didn't feel around for the bottle or the glass. He moved with a fluid precision that made me pause. For a blind man, his spatial awareness was uncanny. "Your dogs won't let me leave," I said, stopping 10 feet away from him. He picked up the glass, swirling the liquid. "My security team is very thorough. They know I require consistent care. I am not your nurse," I snapped. "I quit. I formally resign. Now tell them to unlock the elevator before I call the police." He turned slowly. The dark glasses were still in place, masking his eyes, but his face was set in hard, unyielding lines. He took a sip of the whiskey, the movement drawing my eyes to his throat. That was when I saw it. Just above the crisp white collar of his shirt, creeping up the side of his thick neck, was the edge of a tattoo. It wasn't innocent ink. It was dark, dense, and jagged, the tail of something serpentine. It disappeared under the fabric, hinting at a canvas of violence hidden beneath the expensive suit. "The police," he mused, the word rolling off his tongue like a bad taste. "An interesting choice for a woman in your position, Salima. What is that supposed to mean?" He set the glass down on the bar with a sharp clink. His hand moved to the counter, finding a sleek black tablet. He didn't look at it. He simply picked it up and slid it across the polished surface of the long dining table that separated us. The tablet spun perfectly, slowing down just as it reached the edge closest to me. "Look," he commanded. I hesitated, then stepped forward and looked down at the screen. The blood drained from my face so fast I felt dizzy. It was a financial dossier. My financial dossier. But it wasn't just my student loans or my credit card bills. It was the debt. The crushing, suffocating weight that had been drowning me for 2 years. I looked at the screen. Debtor, Salima Thompson and Foster J. Creditor, Red Tooth Gang. Principal, $350,000. Total outstanding, $500,000. I stared at the numbers, the room spinning. The Red Tooth Gang. The loan sharks my ex-boyfriend Foster had borrowed from before he skipped the country, leaving my name as the guarantor. They had threatened to burn down my mother's house. They had slashed my tires. They were the reason I worked 80 hours a week and slept in a closet-sized apartment. How? I choked out. "How did you get this?" "I bought it," Suk-jong said calmly. He began to walk toward me. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate. He tapped a cane against the floor that I hadn't noticed before, but he didn't seem to rely on it. He used it like a scepter. I looked back at the screen. Across the bottom, stamped in bold green letters, was a single word. Paid. Transfer from Kim Holdings. "You owe the Red Tooth nothing," he said, stopping just a few feet from me. His towering presence sucked the air out of the room. "You owe me. Why?" I whispered, looking up at him. "Why would you do this?" "Because good help is hard to find," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. "And I need a nurse who isn't afraid to hit back, someone who has fire." He took another step, invading my personal space. The scent of whiskey and danger was overwhelming. "Here is the reality, Salima. You have a debt of $500,000. You can work it off here, as my live-in nurse. Good pay, room and board, complete safety. Or," he paused, tilting his head as if listening to a distant sound, "I can transfer the debt back to the Red Tooth Gang. I hear they've been looking for you. Something about a missing payment deadline next week?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a choice. It was an ultimatum wrapped in silk. He had bought my life. I had walked into this penthouse a free woman with a heavy burden, and now I was a slave to a billionaire with tattoos on his neck and ice in his veins. I looked at the tablet, then up at his impenetrable sunglasses. I hated him. I hated the arrogance, the manipulation, the power he held so effortlessly. But I also knew what the Red Tooth Gang did to people who didn't pay. I was trapped. Not by bars, but by a golden cage of his making. "What are the hours?" I asked, my voice cold, admitting defeat without showing fear. Sukjong smirked, the expression revealing a glimpse of sharp white teeth. 24/7, he said. "You belong to me now, Salima. Welcome home." 3 days in the penthouse felt like 3 years in a sensory deprivation tank. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was a physical weight that pressed against your eardrums, broken only by the hum of the high-end refrigerator and the rhythmic tapping of Kim Suk-jong's cane whenever he decided to prowl. And he did prowl. He wasn't the bedridden invalid I had expected. He moved through the apartment with an eerie, quiet confidence, his hand trailing along the furniture, memorizing the space. But mostly, he sat. He sat in that high-backed leather chair facing the window, drinking black coffee, his eyes hidden behind those impenetrable glasses. I tried to stay invisible. I stuck to my routine, checking his vitals in the morning, organizing his medications which he refused to take, and reading quietly in the corner. But I could feel him. Even across the room, it felt like his gaze was tracking me, burning through the dark lenses. It was paranoid, I told myself. The man was blind. He couldn't see the way my uniform fit, or the way I bit my lip when I was reading. But my skin prickled anyway. Nurse Thompson, his voice cut through the silence, low and gravelly. I looked up from my book. He was sitting at the breakfast bar, a steaming ceramic mug in his hand. "Yes, Mr. Kim?" "The coffee," he muttered, grimacing slightly. "It's..." He went to set the mug down, but his hand miscalculated the edge of the coaster. The mug tipped. Scalding dark liquid splashed out, soaking instantly into the front of his pristine white dress shirt. "Damn it," he hissed, recoiling. The mug shattered on the floor, shards of ceramic skittering across the marble. I was moving before the first shard stopped spinning. "Don't move." I grabbed a clean towel from the counter and rushed to him. The coffee was fresh, boiling hot. If it sat against his skin, it would cause a second-degree burn in seconds. "I need to get this shirt off," I commanded, my voice snapping into professional urgency. The fear of the man vanished. Now, he was just a patient. "Stand up." He stood, his jaw clenched, a vein throbbing in his temple. He was breathing hard, the heat radiating off him in waves. My hands flew to the buttons of his shirt. They were small, slippery mother of pearl, difficult to undo with trembling fingers. The scent hit me then, not just the sharp bitterness of the coffee, but the underlying smell of him. Expensive oud wood cologne, crisp linen, and the raw masculine musk of a man in pain. "Hurry," he gritted out. "I'm trying," I snapped back. I popped the last button and shoved the wet fabric aside, peeling it off his broad shoulders. "Let me see the skin." The shirt slid down his arms, pooling at his elbows. My breath caught in my throat with an audible hitch. I had expected burns. I had expected red, angry skin. And I saw that, a patch of pink irritation spreading across his solar plexus. But I didn't see it immediately. I couldn't look away from the ink. Kim Suk-jong wasn't just built like a fighter. He was painted like a warlord. His chest was a mural of violence. A massive, intricate tattoo in the traditional Korean style dominated his torso. It was a dragon, or perhaps a demon, rendered in heavy black ink that looked centuries old. The creature's scales wrapped around his thick pectorals, its claws digging into the muscle near his collarbone, its open, roaring mouth centered over his sternum. The tail coiled down his ripped abdomen, disappearing into the waistband of his trousers. It was terrifying. It was mesmerizing. This wasn't the art of a billionaire investor. This was the mark of the underworld, the viper of soul. The stories I'd heard about the Mafia clans, the brutality, the codes of honor, the blood, were suddenly staring me in the face, etched into the skin of the man I was supposed to be nursing. "Nurse?" His voice was a low warning. I snapped back to reality. The burn," I stammered, my professionalism wavering for the first time. "It looks superficial. First degree mostly. The shirt took the brunt of it." I turned to my medical kit on the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Just do the job, Salima. Clean the wound. Don't ask about the dragon." I grabbed a tube of cooling aloe gel and a sterile gauze pad. "This is going to be cold," I warned, stepping back into his personal space. He stood like a statue, his chest heaving slightly. Being this close to him while he was half naked felt illicit. The heat of his body was overwhelming. I squeezed the gel onto my fingers and touched his skin. His muscles twitched under my touch, hard as granite. I worked the gel into the reddened area on his chest, my fingers gliding over the raised ridges of the tattoo ink. The contrast between the smooth skin and the rough scar tissue of the ink was jarring. "I need to check the side," I murmured, moving to check if the liquid had run down his ribs. "Lift your left arm, please." I reached for another gauze pad with my right hand, aiming for his left side. And then, it happened. Before the words "lift your arm" had fully left my lips, before I had even touched his elbow to guide him, his left arm rose. It was a smooth, precise movement. He lifted his arm just enough to give me access to his ribcage, exactly where I was looking. I froze. My hand hovered in mid-air, the gauze pad trembling slightly. He was blind. He couldn't see me reaching. He couldn't see the trajectory of my hand. He should have waited for my touch, or fumbled, or asked which arm. But he had anticipated the movement perfectly. He saw me. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. The stumbling, the cane, the dark glasses. It was a performance. A lie. My eyes snapped up to his face. He was still staring straight ahead, his expression blank. But then, as if realizing his mistake a split second too late, he let out a low groan and shifted his weight, turning the arm lift into a stretch of pain. "It burns," he rasped, tilting his head back. "Is it done?" It was a good recovery. Seamless, almost. But I had seen it. I was a nurse. I watched bodies for a living. I knew the difference between a reflex and a calculated action. He wasn't blind, which meant for the last 3 days he had watched me. He had watched me bend over to pick up things. He had watched me change out of my scrubs in the hallway mirror when I thought I was alone. A shiver of pure, cold fear violently clashed with the heat radiating from him. Who was this man? And why was he pretending to be helpless? "Almost done," I whispered. My voice sounded steady, but inside I was screaming. I finished applying the gauze, taping it down with quick, efficient movements. I needed to get away from him. I needed distance. I stepped back, putting the island counter between us. "You should let that air dry. Don't put the shirt back on yet." He didn't move to cover himself. He stood there, half naked, the dragon on his chest seeming to breathe with him. He turned his head slowly, tracking me. He knew that I knew. I could feel it in the air, a tension so thick it tasted like metal. He reached out, his hand finding the edge of the counter with practiced ease, and leaned forward. "You're very quiet, Salima," he said softly. The use of my first name sounded like a caress. "Do I scare you?" I looked at the tattoos. I looked at the black glasses that hid the eyes I now knew were watching every breath I took. I gathered my courage, wrapping it around me like armor. "Your tattoos don't scare me, Mr. Kim," I said, meeting the black lenses head-on. "Your silence does." He paused. The corner of his mouth ticked up. "Good," he whispered. "Fear keeps you sharp. Knowledge is power. But, in my case, knowledge was a loaded gun, and I was looking down the barrel. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of hyper-awareness. Every time Kim Suk-jong moved, every time he reached for his water glass, every time he tilted his head, I analyzed it. The illusion was perfect. Almost. But I had seen the crack in the mask. I had seen the arm lift. He wasn't blind. He was a liar. And he was watching me. By 8 p.m., the anger had calcified into a cold, reckless determination. If he wanted to play pretend, fine. But I was done being the audience. I was going to force him off the stage. I found him in the living room. The lights were dimmed to a moody, cinematic low. He was kicked back on the leather sofa, one leg crossed over the other, headphones covering his ears. A heavy history book lay open on his lap, braille, ostensibly, but his fingers weren't moving across the page. I stood in the archway for a moment, just watching him. He looked peaceful, almost human. But I knew better. I knew there was a dragon inked beneath that black cashmere sweater, and I knew there were eyes watching me from behind those dark lenses. Let's see how much you can really see, Mr. Kim. I walked into the room, my footsteps deliberate but soft. I didn't announce myself immediately. Instead, I walked directly into his line of sight. Or what would be his line of sight if he weren't blind. I stopped right in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, where the city lights created a backlit halo around me. Mr. Kim, I said, my voice pitched slightly lower than my usual professional tone. He didn't jump. He reached up and slid the headphones off, letting them rest around his neck. Nurse Thompson, is it time for my evening torture? Or just more pills? Just checking the schedule for tomorrow, I lied smoothly. Dr. Park wants to increase your physical therapy. I held a clipboard, but I didn't look at it. I looked at him. I'm feeling a little warm, I murmured. Is the thermostat working? I set the clipboard down on the coffee table, bending at the waist just enough to be provocative, but professional enough to have plausible deniability. I saw his head tilt. Just a fraction. A microscopic adjustment to get a better angle. I straightened up and reached for the top button of my uniform cardigan. It's stifling in here, I sighed. I undid the first button, then the second. I watched his hands. They were resting on his knees, relaxed. But as the cardigan fell open, revealing the tighter scrub top underneath that clung to my curves, his index finger twitched. I shrugged the cardigan off my shoulders, letting it slide down my arms slowly. I wasn't stripping, I was just making myself comfortable. But to a man who wasn't supposed to be seeing anything, the act of a woman undressing, even partially, should have meant nothing. It didn't mean nothing. I saw his throat work. A heavy, dry swallow. His Adam's apple bobbed. Got you. My heart began to race. A mix of adrenaline and something darker, sharper. I tossed the cardigan onto the chair next to him and took a step closer. I was invading his personal space now. I was close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath and the expensive leather of the couch. I reached up to adjust my ponytail, lifting my arms high. The movement pulled my scrub top up slightly, exposing a sliver of skin at my waist, right where his hand had touched me on that first day. Are you listening, Mr. Kim? I asked softly, dropping my hands but staying close. Or are you distracted? His jaw clenched so hard I thought he might crack a tooth. The veins in his hands stood out as his grip on his knees turned into a white-knuckled vice. He was fighting it. He was fighting the urge to look, the urge to react, the urge to break the charade. I took one more step. I was standing directly between his knees now. If he were blind, I would be a hazard. Since he wasn't, I was a challenge. You look tense, I whispered, leaning down. My face was inches from his. I could see my own reflection in his black glasses. Do you need me to check your pulse again? That was the breaking point. The snap was instantaneous. He didn't speak. He moved. His hand shot out, wrapping around my wrist with bruising force. He didn't fumble. He didn't search. He grabbed me with the precision of a striking cobra. Ah! I gasped as he yanked me downward. I lost my footing. The world tilted, and suddenly I wasn't standing anymore. I was sprawled across his lap, his hard thighs beneath me, his chest a solid wall against my side. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was a capture. His other arm came around my waist, locking me in place like a steel band. I was trapped against him, my face inches from his neck. I could feel the heat of him, the rapid thundering beat of his heart against my ribs. It was hammering just as fast as mine. I looked up, breathless, expecting him to rip the glasses off, expecting the confession. He didn't remove them. He kept his face turned slightly away, maintaining the ruse even now, even with me in his arms. But his grip told me everything. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of my ear. His breath was hot, sending a shiver racing down my spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the electric, dangerous chemistry crackling between us. You are playing a very dangerous game, Salima, he whispered. His voice was a low growl, vibrating through my entire body. Be careful what you wish for. You might find that the monster bites back. I froze, my breath catching. I'm not afraid of you, I managed to whisper back, though my voice trembled. You should be, he murmured, his hand sliding up my back, dangerously close to a caress. Because if I weren't a blind man, I would see exactly what you're trying to do. and I wouldn't stop at just holding you. The air in the room seemed to vanish. The tension was a physical thing, a tightened wire ready to snap and cut us both. I wanted him to kiss me. I wanted to slap him again. I didn't know which impulse was stronger. The sound was jarring, intrusive. Suk-yong stiffened. The moment shattered like glass. He released me abruptly, almost pushing me off his lap. I scrambled to my feet, smoothing my scrubs, my face burning with humiliation and adrenaline. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. He flipped it open, an old burner style. "Speak," he answered, his voice instantly cold, commanded, and utterly detached. He listened for a second, his jaw tightening. "I see," he said. He paused, then corrected himself. "I understand. Secure the perimeter. I'm coming down." He hung up and stood, grabbing his cane. He turned his head toward where I was standing, shivering in the warm room. "Go to your room, Nurse Thompson," he ordered. The playfulness, the heat, the danger, it was all gone, replaced by the cold, ruthless mask of the boss. "Lock the door. Do not come out until morning." "What's happening?" I asked. "Something you don't want to see," he said darkly. And then he walked out of the room, his cane tapping rhythmically on the floor, leaving me alone in the dark with my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The storm broke over Seoul like a hammer hitting an anvil. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse, blurring the city lights into smears of neon blood. Thunder rattled the bones of the building, vibrating through the soles of my feet. I was pacing in the kitchen, a glass of water trembling in my hand. Suk-yong had ordered me to lock my door, to stay put. But I wasn't a dog, and I wasn't a child. My instincts, honed by years of dodging debt collectors and navigating dangerous neighborhoods, were screaming. Then, the lights died. It wasn't a flicker, it was a hard cut. The hum of the refrigerator, the ambient glow of the hallway sconces, everything vanished instantly. The penthouse plunged into a heavy, suffocating blackness. I froze. A power outage in a building like this? Impossible. They had backup generators. They had redundancies. Unless the lines were cut. Crash. The sound of shattering glass came from the far end of the living room, near the terrace doors. It was distinct, sharp, and definitely not the wind. My heart hammered against my ribs. I set the water glass down on the counter, carefully, silently, and reached for my medical bag. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have a taser. But I had a #10 surgical scalpel. I ripped the sterile packaging open with my teeth, the cold steel handle settling into my palm. I moved into the hallway, hugging the wall. The lightning flashed, illuminating the living room in a strobe light burst of blue-white terror. I saw them. 3 shadows moving through the broken terrace doors. They were sleek, professional, dressed in tactical gear. Water dripped from their clothes onto the marble floor. They moved in silence, weapons raised, assassins. I held my breath, shrinking back into the shadows of the kitchen doorway. I needed to get to the service elevator. I needed to. A hand clamped over my mouth from behind. I didn't scream. I reacted. I stomped my heel down hard, driving it into the instep of the person behind me. A grunt of pain. The grip loosened just a fraction. I spun around, slashing blindly with the scalpel. "Bitch." A voice hissed. Lightning flashed again. A man in a balaclava was looming over me. I had sliced his forearm, dark blood was already welling up, but he was big, and he was angry. He backhanded me. The force of the blow sent me stumbling back into the kitchen island. My head cracked against the granite. Stars burst in my vision. "Secure the girl," another voice whispered from the living room. The man lunged at me. I kicked out, aiming for his knee, but he caught my leg. He yanked me forward, slamming my chest against the counter. He pinned me there, his weight crushing the air from my lungs. I thrashed, slashing at the air with the scalpel, but he caught my wrist and twisted it until I dropped the blade. "Quiet," he growled, pressing the cold barrel of a silencer against my temple. "Or I paint the cabinets with your brains." I froze. Tears of frustration and terror pricked my eyes. This was it. I was going to die in a billionaire's kitchen over a debt that wasn't mine. "Drop her." The voice didn't come from the door, it came from the darkness behind the assassin. It was low, calm, and terrifyingly familiar. The assassin stiffened. Who? The sound was wet and sickening. The pressure of the gun against my temple vanished instantly. The assassin didn't scream. He made a choking, gurgling sound, and then went dead weight, collapsing backward onto the floor. Lightning flashed. Kim Suk-yong stood over the body. He wasn't wearing his sunglasses. He wasn't holding his cane. He was dressed in black slacks and a fitted tactical shirt that clung to his broad chest. In his right hand he held a sleek, curved karambit knife, the blade dripping dark fluid. But it was his eyes that stopped my heart. They weren't milky. They weren't wandering. They were sharp, predatory, and focused with laser-like intensity on the doorway behind me. He looked like a demon rising from the pit of hell. "Move," he commanded. There was no stutter, no hesitation. He grabbed my arm, not searching for it, but snatching it from the air, and pulled me behind a thick marble pillar just as two silenced shots chipped the stone where my head had been a second ago. "Stay down," he hissed, pressing me into the cover. "Do not make a sound." "You can see," I whispered, the shock almost overriding the fear. "You can see everything." He didn't look at me. He was scanning the darkness, tracking the movement of the other two intruders. "We'll discuss my medical history later, Salima. Right now, try not to die." He moved away from the pillar. I watched, paralyzed, as he slipped into the shadows. He didn't stumble. He didn't feel his way around the furniture. He moved like smoke. Another flash of lightning lit up the room. I saw one of the intruders creeping near the sofa. He never saw Suk-yong coming. Suk-yong vaulted over the back of the couch, silent as a cat. He landed behind the man, wrapped one massive arm around his throat, and twisted. A sharp crack echoed through the room. The body dropped. The third intruder panicked. "He's here. The Viper is." Suk-yong didn't let him finish. He picked up a heavy crystal decanter from the side table and hurled it across the room with terrifying accuracy. It smashed into the gunman's face, sending him reeling backward. Before the man could recover, Suk-yong was on him. It was a blur of violence, efficient, brutal, and completely soundless. A punch to the throat, a knee to the ribs, and then silence. The room fell still again, save for the heavy drumming of the rain and the rolling thunder. I stayed crouched behind the pillar, shaking. I had known he was dangerous. I had known he was powerful. But this was a slaughter. And he had done it with the ease of a man taking out the trash. Footsteps approached me. Soft, deliberate. Suk-yong stepped into the faint gray light coming from the window. He wiped the blade of his knife on his pant leg. He looked at me, his eyes dark pools of adrenaline and cold calculation. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I shook my head, unable to speak. I looked at the bodies scattered across his pristine floor. Then I looked back at him. The blind billionaire was gone. The Viper of Soul was standing in his place. "Good," he said, reaching down to pull me to my feet. His grip was warm, solid, and undeniably protective. Because the night is just beginning. The silence that followed the violence was heavier than the storm outside. The bodies lay on the marble floor like discarded mannequins, dark pools widening beneath them. My hands were shaking, a violent tremor that started in my fingertips and rattled my teeth. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind a cold, nauseating reality. I had just stabbed a man, and my patient, the blind billionaire, had just executed two others with the efficiency of a machine. Kim Suk-yong didn't shake. He walked over to the wall phone, stepping over a sprawling arm without looking down. He dialed a number, his movements precise. "Unit 4, he said into the receiver. His voice was flat, devoid of the panic that was currently clawing at my throat. "Penthouse. Disposal. 3 packages. Scrub the site." He hung up and turned to me. Without the sunglasses, his face was a revelation. His eyes were dark, sharp, and terrifyingly intelligent. There was no softness in them, no cloudy haze, just the cold, hard stare of a man who had killed before, and would kill again. "Come," he said. It wasn't a request. He didn't wait for me. He walked toward the heavy oak doors of his study. I looked at the carnage one last time, swallowed the bile rising in my throat, and followed him. The study was a fortress within a fortress, walls lined with books, heavy velvet drapes drawn tight, and a smell of leather and tobacco. Suk-yong went straight to the crystal decanter on his desk. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He didn't spill a drop. He held one out to me. "Drink," he ordered. "It helps with the shock." I took the glass, my fingers brushing his. His skin was warm, steady. I downed the whiskey in one burn, the alcohol hitting my stomach like liquid fire. I slammed the glass down on the desk and glared at him. "You can see," I accused. The words felt inadequate, small. "You lied. To me. To everyone. For months." Suk-jong took a slow sip of his drink, leaning back against the edge of the mahogany desk. He crossed his ankles, looking at me with a maddening calmness. "I lied to survive, Salima," he said. "In my world, a weakness is a target. But a perceived weakness? That is a trap." "A trap?" I laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. "You call this a trap? Assassins just broke into your house. And they are dead," he countered smoothly. "But you are asking why? Why the charade?" He set the glass down and walked toward the fireplace, staring at the unlit logs. 6 months ago, a shipment of mine was intercepted. Then another. Then a raid on one of my safe houses. The police were always one step ahead. The rival clans knew my moves before I made them. I have a mole, Salima. Someone in my inner circle. Someone who sits at my table and eats my food. He turned back to me, his eyes narrowing. "Do you know what people do when they think you are broken? When they think you are blind and helpless? They stop whispering. They speak freely. They leave documents on the table. They forget you are a predator and start treating you like furniture." I became invisible. "And did it work?" I asked. "Did you find them?" "I narrowed it down," he said darkly. "But tonight proves that they are getting desperate. They know I am vulnerable. They sent a hit squad to finish what the accident couldn't." He pushed off the desk and walked toward me, stopping just outside my personal space. The air between us shifted. It wasn't the predatory tension of the last few days. It was something else. "Respect? You saved my life tonight," he said quietly. Most people would have screamed. "You picked up a scalpel." "I did what I had to do," I muttered, looking away. "Yes, you did." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times. "Your debt to the Red Tooth Gang is paid. I cleared it the day you arrived. But as of this moment, your contract with me is void. You are free to go." My head snapped up. "What?" "Pack your things," he said, his voice turning cold again. "The cleaners will be here in 10 minutes. They can drop you anywhere in the city. You have your life back, Salima. Go." He turned his back on me, dismissing me. I stared at his broad back. I thought about my apartment, the peeling paint, the leaking faucet, the constant fear of the debt collectors. I thought about the hospital shifts, the rude doctors, the endless, grinding poverty. And then I looked at him. The viper of soul. A monster, yes. But a monster who had shielded me with his own body. A man who had just offered me freedom when he could have easily silenced me to protect his secret. I realized something terrifying. I didn't want to go back to being ordinary. I didn't want to be safe and poor. I felt more alive in this room, standing next to a killer, than I had felt in my entire life. "No," I said. He paused. "No? I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You said you have a mole. You said they're desperate. If I leave now, I'm a loose end. They'll find me. They'll torture me to find out what I know about you. I'm safer here." He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "It is a war zone, Salima. You could die." "I almost died tonight," I countered, crossing my arms. "At least here, the person watching my back can actually see." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It wasn't the smirk from before, it was genuine. "You are a strange woman, Salima Thompson," he murmured. "I'm a practical woman, Mr. Kim. And besides," I took a step toward him. "You need me. Do I? You can't drop the act yet, I reasoned, my mind racing. If you suddenly reveal you can see, the mole goes underground. You need to catch them in the act. You need to stay blind. And for that, you need a nurse. He watched me for a long moment, evaluating me. Then, he nodded. Tomorrow night, he said. The grand gala. Every major player in the Seoul underworld will be there. Politicians, CEOs, and the heads of the 5 families. The traitor will be there. I need to flush him out. How? By presenting himself with the perfect opportunity, Suk-jong said. I will attend. I will be frail. I will be recovering from the trauma of tonight's break-in. And you? He stepped closer, reaching out. His hand came up to my face. I flinched, instinctively, but he didn't strike. His thumb gently brushed the side of my cheekbone where the assassin had backhanded me. The skin was tender, bruising. You will be my eyes, he whispered. You will guide me. You will whisper in my ear. We will walk into the lion's den together. His touch was electric. It wasn't possessive like before. It was an anchor. Does it hurt? He asked softly, looking at the bruise. I'll live, I whispered, my breath catching. You fought well, Salima, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. Better than half my men. We are not nurse and patient anymore. What are we? I asked. He lowered his hand, but his gaze didn't waver. Partners, he said. Now? Go get some ice for that face. We have a performance to rehearse. The dress was a weapon. It lay on the bed like a pool of spilled blood, deep crimson silk that looked like it would slip through your fingers if you tried to hold it. It was backless, with a slit that ran dangerously high up the left leg. Put it on, Suk-jong had said, tossing the garment bag onto my duvet an hour ago. If we are walking into hell, you should look like the devil. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, smoothing the fabric over my hips. It fit like a second skin. My hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, exposing the curve of my neck. I looked expensive. I looked dangerous. I looked nothing like the nurse who scrubbed bedpans for minimum wage. A knock at the door. Enter, I said. Suk-jong walked in. He was breathtaking. He wore a tuxedo cut from midnight blue velvet, the lapels sharp as razors. The black sunglasses were back in place, masking the eyes I now knew saw everything. He carried a silver-headed cane, but his grip on it was loose, relaxed. He stopped in the doorway, his head tilting slightly as he scanned me from head to toe. For a moment, the silence stretched, heavy and charged. Turn around, he commanded softly. I did. The silk whispered against my skin. Perfect, he murmured. He walked toward me, not stopping until he was standing directly behind me. I could see us in the mirror, the massive dark figure of the Mafia boss and the woman in red standing in his shadow. One final accessory, he said. He knelt. My breath hitched. He reached under the high slit of my dress. His large warm hand grasped my thigh, his fingers rough against the smooth skin. He wasn't caressing me, he was securing something. I looked down. He was strapping a sleek black leather holster to my thigh. Inside sat a compact, suppressed pistol. It's a P238, he said, his voice low and businesslike, though the heat of his breath against my leg made my knees weak. Safety is off. Chamber is loaded. If things go wrong, and they might, you aim for the center of mass. Do not hesitate. He stood up, his hand lingering on my hip for a fraction of a second before pulling away. Tonight, you are not just a nurse, Salima, he said, meeting my gaze in the mirror. Tonight, you are lethal. The grand gala was held at the Lotte Signiel, floating 79 floors above the city. It was a shark tank filled with champagne. As the elevator doors opened, the noise hit us, a wall of chatter, clinking crystal, and the frantic pop-pop-pop of camera flashes. Stay close, Suk-jong whispered, his hand finding the small of my back. Be my eyes. Always, I whispered back. We stepped out. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. They saw the blind billionaire, the fallen king, the wounded animal. They stared with a mix of pity and predatory hunger. I guided him, my hand tucked firmly in the crook of his arm. To the world, I was the devoted caregiver helping her invalid employer. In reality, I was his radar, 3 o'clock, I murmured, my lips barely moving, leaning in as if sharing a joke. Senator Park. He's talking to the construction magnate. He looks nervous, checking his watch. Good, Suk-yong replied, staring blankly ahead, tapping his cane. Keep moving. 9 o'clock, I continued. 2 men in security uniforms. They aren't hotel staff, their shoes are wrong. Tactical boots. Noted. Avoid the west exit. We moved through the ballroom, a perfectly synchronized unit. Every squeeze of his arm, every tilt of my head conveyed information. We were dancing a tango of espionage in the middle of a ballroom. Ah, the Viper of Soul has descended from his mountain. The voice was oily, loud, and dripping with false joviality. A man blocked our path. He was short, round, and sweating profusely in a tuxedo that was too tight. His smile didn't reach his eyes that were beady and darting. Director Choi. The snake. Director Choi, Suk-yong said, bowing his head slightly. It has been too long. I didn't know you would be attending. I wouldn't miss it. Choi laughed, clapping Suk-jong on the shoulder a little too hard. We were all so worried when we heard about the trouble at your penthouse last night. A break-in? In this economy? I froze. The break-in hadn't been on the news. We had scrubbed it. Suk-jong didn't flinch. He squeezed my hand against his arm. Hard. Steady. Bad luck, Suk-jong said smoothly. Just some amateurs looking for jewelry. My security team handled it. Of course. Choi sneered. He turned his gaze to me. His eyes raked over my body, lingering on the slit of my dress, right where the gun was hidden. And this must be the famous nurse. You have upgraded your staff, Suk-jong. She is stunning. He reached out and took my free hand, bringing it to his damp lips. His skin felt clammy. You must be very brave, my dear, Choi whispered, his eyes locking onto mine. To work for a man with so many complications. I hope you are getting paid well for the risk. The threat was subtle, but it was there. I know who you are. I know you're in danger. I pulled my hand back, keeping my expression polite but cold. Mr. Kim is an excellent employer, director. I have no complaints. Loyalty, Choitsk. So rare these days, and so expensive. He looked back at Suk-jong. We have business to discuss, my old friend. The merger. I have reserved the orchid room. Shall we? This was it. The trap. Suk-yong smiled, a small, helpless smile that didn't match the lethal tension radiating from his body. Lead the way, Choi, he said. I am in your hands. As we followed Choi toward the private corridor, the noise of the party faded. The air grew colder. He knows, I whispered, my voice barely audible. He suspects. Suk-jong corrected, his voice a ghost of sound. He is fishing. But he made a mistake. What? He mentioned the break-in, Suk-jong said. Only the person who sent the cleaners would know about that. He squeezed my arm again. We are going into the box, Salima. When the door closes, the acting stops. Are you ready? I felt the cold steel of the gun against my thigh. I looked at the man beside me, the man who walked into darkness with his head held high. I'm with you, I whispered. Then let's go, he said. Time to show the snake who really owns the garden. We stepped through the double doors of the orchid room. The trap was sprung. The orchid room was a mausoleum of velvet and gold. As the heavy double doors clicked shut behind us, the noise of the gala was severed instantly. The silence that replaced it wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Director Choi walked to the center of the room, his oily smile widening. But he didn't sit at the head of the long mahogany table. He stood to the side, acting like a servant. At the head of the table, sitting in Suk-jong's usual seat, was a man I knew. I had seen him in the penthouse a dozen times. I had brought him coffee. I had watched him laugh with Suk-jong, sharing cigars and discussing legal strategies. Minho, Suk-jong's personal attorney, his oldest friend, his right hand. He was pouring himself a glass of vintage scotch, Suk-jong's private reserve. You're late, Suk-jong, Minho said, not bothering to look up as he swirled the amber liquid. But then again, it takes longer to navigate the world when you're stumbling around in the dark, doesn't it? I felt Sukjong stiffen beside me. It wasn't fear. It was a rigid, terrible shock. The kind of betrayal that doesn't just stab you in the back, it twists the knife. Min, Sukjong said. His voice was a low rumble, dangerously calm. I didn't think the rot went this deep. Minho took a sip, then looked up. He smiled, a cold, calculated expression that made my skin crawl. The rot is necessary, brother. You've grown soft. You let the Viper legend do the work while you played recluse. And now? He gestured vaguely at me. Now you let a nurse distract you. She is not a distraction, Sukyong said. She is a liability, Minho corrected. Director Choi, if you please. Choi snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the room's corners, 4 men materialized. They weren't hotel security. They were mercenaries, heavily armed. Sukyong didn't move. He did something far more terrifying. He reached up and slowly removed his black sunglasses. He folded them and placed them into his breast pocket. Then, he opened his eyes, dark, burning, and fully focused on Minho. Minho flinched. The glass in his hand rattled against the table. So, he whispered, it was true. You can see. I see everything, Min, Sukjong growled. I see a coward sitting in a king's chair. Kill him. Minho screeched, losing his composure. Now, Salima. Sukjong roared. I didn't hesitate. My hand flew to the slit in my dress, fingers closing around the grip of the P238. I drew the weapon, the metal cool against my palm. But they were ready. I heard the crack of electricity before I felt it. A taser probe hit me squarely in the shoulder. A voltage of pure agony ripped through my nervous system. My muscles locked up instantly. My hand spasmed, and the gun clattered uselessly to the floor. Salima, Sukjong shouted, turning toward me. That split second of distraction was all they needed. 2 guards slammed into him from behind, wielding batons. Sukyong took a blow to the kidneys that would have dropped a normal man, but he just grunted, spinning around to backhand one attacker into the wall. He was a whirlwind of violence, but he was fighting to get to me, not to save himself. Stop. Choi yelled. I was hauled up from the floor, my limbs feeling like jelly. I gasped for air, smoke rising from the hole in my dress where the probe had hit. Cold metal pressed against my temple. One more step, Viper, and she dies. Choi screamed, jamming the barrel of his gun into my skull. Sukjong froze. He was mid-swing, his fist raised to crush a guard's windpipe. He stopped dead. His chest was heaving, his tuxedo jacket torn, his knuckles bloody. He looked at me. For the first time since I'd met him, I saw terror in his eyes. It wasn't fear of death. It was fear of my death. The monster who had slaughtered assassins in his kitchen without blinking was suddenly paralyzed. Drop it, Choi sneered. Drop the cane. Drop the attitude. Get on your knees, or I paint the wall with her pretty face. Don't. I rasped, my voice weak. Sukjong, don't. He didn't listen to me. He didn't look at Minho. He kept his eyes locked on mine, a silent apology written in them. Slowly, agonizingly, he opened his hands. The silver-headed cane clattered to the floor. He sank to his knees. The proudest, most dangerous man in Seoul knelt on the carpet, surrendering his power to save a nurse with a bad credit score. Let her go, Min, Sukjong said, his voice ragged. This is between us. Minho laughed, regaining his confidence now that the Viper was declawed. Oh, she's not going anywhere, Sukjong. We need leverage, if you want her back. Well, we'll see if you survive the night. Minho waved his hand. Take her to the warehouse. Leave him to the boys. No. I screamed as the guards began to drag me backward. Sukjong. Take him apart, Minho ordered the guards surrounding Sukjong. Piece by piece. The guards swarmed him. I saw a boot connect with Sukyong's ribs. I saw a baton strike his head. He slumped forward, blood spraying onto the floor. Fight back. I screamed, kicking and thrashing against the men holding me. Fight them. They dragged me toward the service exit at the back of the room. My vision blurred with tears. I watched as Sukyong, on his knees, took another blow. But then, just as the guards reached the door, Sukyong's head snapped up. He roared. It was a primal sound, A sound of pure, unadulterated rage. He grabbed the leg of the nearest attacker and twisted. A sickening snap echoed through the room. He surged upward, ignoring the blows raining down on him, rising like a demon from the ashes. He wasn't fighting to survive. He was fighting to follow me. Salima. He bellowed, his voice shaking the walls. The heavy door slammed shut in my face, cutting off his scream. I was alone in the corridor with the monsters. And he was trapped in the room with his betrayal. The smell of rust and low tide was suffocating. I was zip-tied to a steel chair in the center of a cavernous, abandoned warehouse. Rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof, drowning out the distant wail of tugboats on the Han River. My dress, the beautiful crimson silk, was torn at the hem, stained with grease and the dirt of the van floor. You should have seen him, Choi. Minho laughed, pacing in front of me. He held a bottle of champagne, the pop of the cork echoing like a gunshot. The great viper of soul, crawling on the carpet like a dog. It was pathetic. Director Choi chuckled nervously, wiping sweat from his forehead. Are you sure he's dead? The guard said he fought like a demon. He was unarmed and outnumbered 10-1, Minho scoffed, taking a swig straight from the bottle. He's meat. By morning, Kim Holdings will be ours. And this one. He pointed the bottle at me, champagne spilling onto the concrete. She'll fetch a high price on the international market. A nurse who served the viper? Very exotic. I didn't answer. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Instead, I focused on my hands behind my back. My wrists were raw, the plastic ties digging into my skin. But they had made a mistake. They hadn't checked my hair. Buried in the ruined chignon was a long steel hairpin, sharp and sturdy. I had managed to shake it loose in the van. Now, I worked it between my wrists, my fingers cramping as I fished for the locking mechanism of the zip tie. Click. The plastic tongue gave way. The tie loosened just a fraction. It wasn't enough to slip my hands out yet, but it was enough to wait for the right moment. What's that? Choi asked, freezing. The warehouse lights flickered. A deep, mechanical groan reverberated through the building. Then, darkness. Total, absolute pitch black. Who cut the power? Minho shouted, his voice cracking. Get the generator. Use your flashlights. Beams of light cut through the gloom, swinging wildly as the 6 guards stationed around the perimeter panicked. I can't see anything. One guard yelled, Shut up and watch the doors. Minho commanded. The sound was wet, sharp, and terrified. A flashlight beam spun wildly and hit the floor. The guard holding it didn't scream. He just gargled, a choking sound that was cut short by the thud of a body hitting the concrete. He's here, I whispered into the dark. A savage hope flared in my chest. Fire. Choi screamed, pulling his gun. Fire at anything that moves. Muzzle flashes lit up the warehouse like a strobe light, revealing brief, terrifying vignettes of violence. In the flashes, I saw him. He wasn't the elegant billionaire in the velvet tuxedo anymore. He was a nightmare. His jacket was gone. His white shirt was shredded, soaked in blood, both his and others. He moved through the hail of bullets with a fluid, terrifying grace, ducking and weaving as if he could sense the trajectory of every round. In his right hand, he held the silver-headed cane, but the wood sheath was gone. A long, gleaming steel blade extended from the handle, a sword cane. He lunged at the nearest guard. The blade flashed. The guard fell. He spun, using the momentum to kick another man in the chest, sending him flying into a stack of oil drums. He was cutting a path straight to me. Stop him. Minho shrieked, backing away. Kill him. But they couldn't stop him. He was the darkness. He was the storm. A guard charged him with a knife. Suk-jong didn't even slow down. He parried the strike with his left forearm, ignoring the slash that opened up his skin, and drove the sword cane through the man's shoulder. He was 10 feet away now. His eyes found mine in the chaos. They were wild, burning with pain and rage, but focused entirely on me. Minho realized he was out of soldiers. Panic finally overtook his arrogance. He lunged at me, grabbing my hair and yanking my head back. He pressed the jagged edge of the broken champagne bottle to my throat. Stop. Minho screamed. One step and I opened her throat. Suk-jong froze. He stood amidst the bodies of his enemies, chest heaving, blood dripping from his sword and his fingertips. He was 5 feet away. Too far to strike before Minho cut me. Drop the sword, Sukjong, Minho panted, his breath smelling of expensive alcohol and fear. You lose. You always lose. Sukjong's eyes narrowed. He didn't drop the sword. He looked at me. He didn't signal. He didn't speak. But I knew. Now. I didn't wait to be saved. I ripped my hands apart with all my strength. The loosened zip tie snapped. Minho gasped, surprised by the movement. I didn't try to run. I drove my right elbow back, slamming it into Minho's gut. As he doubled over, gasping, I stomped my heel down onto his instep, the same move I'd used in the kitchen, but fueled by weeks of terror and rage. Bitch. He howled, his grip on the bottle loosening. That was all the opening Sukjong needed. He didn't lunge. He threw. The sword cane left his hand, flying through the air like a silver javelin. It took Minho in the shoulder, pinning him to the wooden crate behind him. He screamed, dropping the bottle, pinned like a butterfly to a board. Sukjong was on him in a heartbeat. He didn't pull the sword out. He grabbed Minho by the lapels of his suit and headbutted him. Crack. Then again. Crack. Minho slumped, unconscious and bleeding, pinned to the crate. The warehouse fell silent, save for the rain. Sukjong turned slowly. He looked at Director Choi, who was cowering in the corner, his gun lying on the floor, his hands raised in surrender. Leave, Sukjong growled. His voice was a ruin, hoarse and wet. Tell the others what you saw. Tell them the Viper is awake. Choi scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet, and ran into the night. Sukjong stood there for a second longer, swaying. Then, the adrenaline abandoned him. His knees buckled. Sukjong. I ran to him, catching him just as he collapsed. He was heavy, dead weight against me. We sank to the concrete floor together. My hands hovered over him, terrified to touch him. There was so much blood. His shirt was in ribbons. A deep gash ran across his ribs, another on his arm. His face was swollen from the beating at the gala. Hey, he rasped, his eyes fluttering open. He looked up at me, his vision seemingly swimming. You got out of the ties. I told you, I choked out, tears finally spilling over, mixing with the grime on my face. I'm not helpless. He tried to smile, but it turned into a grimace of pain. He reached up, his bloody hand trembling as he touched my cheek. I know, he whispered. That's why I came back. I couldn't let my partner have all the fun. You idiot, I sobbed, pressing my hand over the wound on his ribs to staunch the bleeding. You absolute idiot. You could have died. I see you, Salima, he murmured, his eyes drifting shut, his voice barely a breath. Even in the dark. I see you. His hand slipped from my cheek. His head lolled back against my shoulder. Sukjong? I shook him gently. Stay with me. Don't you dare close your eyes. Sukjong. I fumbled for his wrist, finding a pulse. It was weak, thready, but there. I looked around the empty warehouse, the bodies of our enemies scattered in the shadows. We had won. But as I held the broken body of the man who had bought my life, I realized the war wasn't over. It was just starting. I've got you, I whispered into his hair, pulling him tighter against me. I've got you. The news anchor's voice drifted from the wall-mounted screen, polished and oblivious. Reports confirm that Kim Holdings CEO, Kim Suk-jong, has made a miraculous recovery following experimental ocular surgery in Zurich. Stock prices have surged. I muted the screen with a flick of the remote. The penthouse was unrecognizable. The heavy blackout drapes were gone, replaced by sheer linen that let the winter sun flood the room. It didn't smell like antiseptic and stale air anymore. It smelled of fresh espresso, expensive leather, and the Joe Malone candle burning on the heavy oak desk. Sweetheart, Mr. Kang sneered, waving his hand at me without looking away from Suk-jong. Could you fetch us some more water? The men are discussing logistics. I didn't move from my seat at the opposite end of the conference table. I crossed my legs, smoothing the fabric